Tableau that we did a couple months ago last semester. So if you want a more rudimentary understanding of Tableau, definitely go to that one. It's on our YouTube page. If you just type in Rutgers Bits, look for our logo, you'll find it. And somebody will also be putting in the URL for our YouTube page in the chat, so you can take a look at that and all the other BDAA stuff, as well as a bunch of other stuff we have on our channel. So go check that out beforehand if you're a little lost today. Today's agenda, I'll hand it off to Amir.
So working off of part one, so we're going to be working on part two, which is a lot more of creating your own unique calculations and like what calculations you are capable of doing, as well as getting more into visuals like radio buttons, big KPI numbers, different database and cross-database filters, and basic understanding of how interactive Tableau can be. So we'll go through a lot of these today, and it's not going to be like, we'll start with simple calculations, but they'll get a little bit more complicated. And if you have any questions, just like at any time, unmute yourself, enter it into the chat, and we want everyone caught up at the same time. So what's great about Tableau is that it is very user-friendly. It has a great GUI, so it's not as difficult to use as you think, but you have to start thinking a little bit logically in terms of what you want to produce in terms of data and how to make that possible. So that's what we will be covering today.
I was muted. So I will stop sharing for now, and Amir will start sharing for the first part of what we have in store for everyone.
So for anyone that was able to make it to our first workshop, this was kind of like the basic simple dashboard that we created at the end of it. And we're literally going to pick off right where we left off. So just to do a 5-minute recap of what we did and like what we produced, just for those people who weren't able to make it. So Tableau always starts off with your data source. In this specific example, we're working with Global Superstore, which is a great foundational database that's available on their Tableau website. It's a part of the e-learning course. It's used in a lot of the intro videos. So there's multiple resources surrounding this data source and how you can use it. So the Global Superstore data source is a Microsoft Excel workbook. That's kind of like, besides a text file, the most basic data connection you can have for this. However, there's other things you can add, like a server. You can connect to Oracle, even SAP, and other database servers. And that's more for when you're working with a job or a company and for things like that. And someone can always help you make those connections when you first start. But for the sake of simplicity and our time, we're going to be working with Global Superstore, which is an Excel workbook. Now, once you connect it to the Excel workbook, your data kind of loads in this view over here, and it breaks down different fields and calculations that are in there. So every row and then every data point underneath that category. So this is what we're going to be working with today. Now, at the end of our first workshop, we created this dashboard. So this was something really simple. We started with total profit, total sales, because this database is working with total sales across regions for different stores for the same company. So we talked about where the majority of their sales are coming based on category, and then how their profit is comparing to their order date. So we'll be reviewing some of these steps today, but the basis of today will be based on calculations and creating new visuals. So we'll first start with our first subject, which is filtering. So filtering in Tableau is very important. So it allows you to section off pieces of data, make it easier to see, and there's different ways that you can do that. So on the maximum level that you can filter by is in this data source pane. In this data source pane, in this top right corner, you're going to have a filter section. Now this would filter your entire data set. So this won't even show up when you're dragging and dropping fields into the creating aspect of graphs and charts. So if you filter anything out from here, it won't show up in any calculations at all. So an example of when you would be able to use this, let's say if you're working for a company who only wants to work with data from the last 10 years. So in this, you would add a filter for, let's say, order date, and you would put your time frame into whatever quarter or year, anything that you're interested in calculating. This helps kind of splice your data on a master level and kind of work with smaller sets of data that are relevant to your your project or whatever you're working on. Now, a second way that you can filter is on individual sheets. So here's an example of filtering on an individual sheet. So in this one, we filtered by region, category, year, and month. So these are just accessible in terms of narrowing down your data. And why that's important is because in our final dashboard from our last workshop, you would be able to select specific regions and it would reflect in all of those numbers. So if I clicked on just Africa, give it a second to load. All right, while that's taking a second to load. So if I selected on Africa, you would only see the data relevant to just Africa or even just Canada. So we can work on that. Now, the last way to filter is actually just highlighting on objects within the actual field. So like, let's say if I click on China and a country, it will just show China's category and sales or profitability plus the region. And that's what makes Tableau very interactive. It's not just inputting a bunch of commands and clicking a bunch of boxes. You can click through things. There's tooltips that describe certain things, lines, trends, and pinpoint different specific data types. So those are the 3 ways that we filter. Now we went over our review. We went over different ways to filtering. So now we're going to move on to creating calculations. So what does creating calculations even mean? So we'll start with a new sheet here. So here are all the fields that we currently have. But let's say if we want to add something else. So in our last workshop, we'll start with something basic like a ratio. So in this one, we're going to work with profit and sales. The way that we did that is that we went to analysis. And in analysis, you're going to create a calculated field. So what is a calculated field? A calculated field is using one or more of your already existing like categories, dimensions, or whatever you want to call them or mention them, and then creating a new equation. So in this one, we're going to be making a profitability ratio. Now, when you're doing a profitability ratio, it's basically the sum of your profit divided by your sales. Now, I did that pretty quickly because as soon as it comes up, so as soon as it comes up, your fields will automatically populate trying to see what you're trying to enter. So it's really easy to click profit, easy to click sales. Why we use the sum is that if you just use profit divided by sales, you're working with one or multiple numbers. And that's more for table calculations, which is what we'll go over later. But if you're creating an aggregated ratio or anything else that's like an overall aspect of your entire Tableau workbook, then you're always going to want to aggregate your data. So then you have the most valid numbers. Now, as you can see on the bottom, it says that this calculation contains errors. Let's see what that meant. So it's like, it's missing an operator. Now, on further review, you notice that you're missing just a parentheses.
Amir, I don't think we can see the calculated field.
For which one?
Oh, the one that you're doing?
You can't see it happen?
Yeah, we can't see it happen. That's weird.
So like there's a window, but you don't see any typing.
Yeah, no, we can't see the window.
Okay, hold on. Let me stop my share and start again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it happens with me sometimes too.
It may be because I was sharing on just the Tableau. I have to share my desktop so you can get the pop-outs. So
All right.
let me just share from my desktop. Can we see it now?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So everything I was saying makes more or less sense. So you'll be able to, this pop-up comes up when you click on create a calculated field on top under analysis, and then you'd be able to name your calculations with whatever variable you're interested in naming it. So for this one, it's profit, which comes up automatically divided by sales. And then it will tell you whether or not that your Oh, we already have a field. Let's name that. Hold on. So each name has to be unique. So we already put it in just for that. So here is the one that we made previously. So this is your profit divided by sales. And it will tell you if the calculation is valid or not. It also tells you what this calculation is dependent on, which is kind of important because you need to see how many of your sheets or your dashboards that it's affecting. That's all for like a double checking and double check your own work. So this is like the simplest calculation you can do. Profitability ratio, just taking two fields and dividing them by each other. Now we'll move on to something a little bit more complicated. So another way that we use to creating calculated fields is to segment data. And by doing that, we're going to create a profitability indicator, which is right here. So what we did here is that we created a profitability indicator to kind of categorize your sales based on like a benchmark. So if there were any sales here that was greater than 100, we would consider that highly profitable. If it was less than that, then it would be considered unprofitable. If there was anything else in between that wasn't caught up in this 100 field, it would just be considered profitable. So using this setup, what we basically did was an if-then statement. And this is really similar to a lot of coding languages you're already really familiar with. And then once you actually type out stuff, it will tell you the arguments that are needed for the calculation itself. So I'm just going to open a new calculated field and we'll analysis, create calculated field. So like, let's say if we were creating an if-then statement, we'll start with if. And then if we'll put, we're talking about sales, so we'll put sales in. And then we want to say that if it's greater than 100, then we'll consider it highly profitable. And considering highly profitable as a string, of course, it's in quotations, so nothing new or less to any other coding languages you may have. Then you can also put an else if for any other conditions that you tend to stack with your calculations. So what happens to everything that is less than or equal to 100 would be considered unprofitable. And then towards the end of that, you have an else for anything that's left behind in your conditions. And then that would be considered just profitable. And then you end it. And it will tell you whether or not that it's a valid calculation. So it says the end has to match the if character. So
I think you can just get rid of the sales after the else.
Yeah, you're right. Double checking. Okay. So then it will tell you if your calculation is valid or not. If it's not, you work through it and figure out what's going on. What's great about these calculations is that the output of our calculation is a string, and that's detected here automatically. So like you'll know that data type is a string. So then we'll move on to our next calculation, which is a little bit more complicated. We'll be doing z-scores. So there's a lot of built-in statistical functions already in Tableau that really help. But for more complicated things like z-scores is something that you're going to have to do. And some of the built-in calculations that we have here are, let's go to just sales. So if you go to sales, then drag sales into here. And just sort of reference, like I'm doing more of the calculated stuff, and then John will go over more of the actual creating visuals. So when you enter a dimension into one of the columns or row fields, you'll be able to kind of change what it says. So this one is showing sum of sales, but some other things that you can do with it is average it, do the median, the count. You can do a standard deviation, the variance, population, or sample size. You can make it discrete or continuous, or you can add a table calculation, which is what we'll be working on now. So these are some built-in ones, but as you can see that we don't have one for z-scores. So to start creating z-scores, we need to make a calculated field for average sales. Why do we need to make one for average sales? It's because at the end of the day, like z-scores are basically your average sale minus what is expected, well, your individual score minus your average sale over your standard deviation. So what we're going to do is we're going to have to create a placeholder for your average sales, a placeholder for your standard deviations, and then subtract that from just your sales. So we need to make 3 calculations in order just to make our z-score. So we'll first start with our average sales. Well, it's average sales. And then with table calculations, so you can just do average. An average would come up. However, a table calculation, you're looking at things in a specific window. So you're looking at a window average. Now, what's the difference between a regular average and a window average? So a window average actually is only focused on the data presented within your sheet. So once you put it in, you have to select your variables that are in your calculations like manually in here, and we'll do that very soon. However, an overall average formula will deal with all of the data that's existed in your database. So for this, we're going to be working with table calculations. So that's when you use your window functions because you're shrinking everything into a window. So for this one, we're going to start with our window average of sales. So the window average of sales is going to give us our average sales. However, we always work with aggregations so we can include all of our data. Okay, so now we have a table calculation for average sales. Next, we're going to make a table calculation for your standard deviation. So we're going to create another calculated field. And these are just examples of many formulas that you can create depending on what you're interested in doing. So just showing you some of the statistical side of what's available. So right now we're going to do standard deviation sales. To do the standard deviation, again, we're going to work with window functions just because if you're going to use the average sales we created before inside your standard deviation sales, you have to put table calculations within table calculations and aggregated calculations within aggregated calculations. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a couple of errors. So first, we'll start off with window standard deviation. And you're doing that with, again, the sum of sales because we always work with aggregated data. And then again, just double check that calculation is valid. And down here, it will note that it's a table calculation. Now, our last one that we're going to make is for your actual z-score. So again, you're going to create another calculated field, and this is for your z-score. So to create your z-score, you're going to have the sum of sales. You're going to subtract that from your average sales. And this average sales, if you can see, it has an equal sign plus like a dollar, like, was it not a dollar sign, like a hashtag. And that equal sign and hashtag means it's a calculated number. And that calculated number was the one that we just created previously. So you're going to subtract your average sales, and then you're going to take all of that, and then you're going to divide it by your standard deviation, which is the basic formula for your z-scores. So the standard deviation of sales. And then with that, okay. So just a little troubleshooting there. So basically what happened was that we had our sum in the front. So you can't really divide the sum of this and this if there's already a sum inside average sales. So a little bit of troubleshooting there, but we take the sum of sales, we subtract average sales from it, and then divide that by the standard deviation of sales. And then you'll double check that it says valid, and then you can create that. So now we're going to start with creating an actual visual with the z-scores that we made. So first, let's take our final calculation of z-scores and drag it to our columns, see what we're working with. So for table calculations, you'll have this little triangle. This little triangle will tell you it's a table calculation. Now, previously I said that you're going to need to go back in and then put in your parameters. So we're going to compute this table calculation using state. So we'll drag state into rows, and then we'll be able to compute it using your state dimension. Now with that, then you can actually see some numbers that were computed. So what happens is that with table calculations, it's only relevant to the sheet. So whatever variables are accessible within the sheet, those are the ones that you can utilize. So in our case, we can compute using either the cell or the state. So we click state. Now we're going to kind of make this up a little bit look better visually, and we can drag z-score to color. It would automatically give a range. The bluer ones have higher z-scores and the orange ones are negative, and then white would be like 0. Then we can also add some more information to our tooltip. We can add it to a label so then you can clearly see the numbers, and then all that information is available. So at the end of the day, we can end up seeing z-scores of every state and how well they're performing. So the z-scores of sales, so like in California, you're exceeding your expectations as it's the largest z-score, maybe your largest market, and maybe your most profitable. However, for a lot of these orange ones and the negatives, they're performing less than your average sales. So it's a great, easy statistical way to understand how each state is performing in your sales. So with that, we covered 3 ways to filter, doing a simple calculation of profit and ratios. So with our profitability ratio, so going back to that, simple profit divided by sales. Then we went over to segmenting data with our profitability indicator. So that's using if, else, if and then statements, as well as elif and then else. So you can kind of segment your data and put them into categories. And then lastly, we created a statistical z-score calculation that's dependent on multiple calculations. And this would be our final result for that. And this is just one way of an example of how you can use that list of calculations. So that's pretty much the basis of all the calculations we're going to be doing today. And now Sean's going to share his screen and go over how to make some visuals using the calculations we just made. So before we move on to that, does anyone have any questions based on calculations only, or connecting databases, or if you want me to go through anything again? I'm taking silence as we're all good, but I'll give you guys a minute. Sure, so I'll go over standard deviation of sales again. So just go to that. So standard deviation is a built-in function, so it's just one that's readily available. And the reason that we're using window standard deviation, there's also just regular standard deviation, is because we're working with table calculations, and that's because you're narrowing things down in a window. So we're going to do window standard deviation, which is easily accessible, and then you're just going to input your sales, which is your original pulling of your data point. And then you're going to have to put some, because we always work with aggregated values. And you're done. So that's basically it. And that's how you kind of build up on different calculations. And there's no limit to how many calculated fields that you can create. It really depends on what you're trying to do. If you're doing something more of like statistical, or you're just doing basic KPIs of ratios, or trying to segment data into different categories. So is there any other questions? Okay, great. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and then we can go more into the fun part of creating visuals after you've done all the hard work of your calculations. And trust me, it's rewarding to see what actually happens in the end.
Yep, couldn't have said it better myself. So Amir showed you how to go through all the calculated fields for the calculations and all that. And so what I'm going to be going over is, like we said, the visuals. Just to make sure, I'm just going to open a calculated field to see if you can see it. Can you all see it?
Yeah, we can see them.
Okay, perfect. So now let's start with creating the visuals. So Amir has already made the z-score one. The next one I'm going to talk about, I'll add a few. Some of them we'll put into a dashboard, kind of to put all the data together and make it more interactive. And some of them I'll just put kind of to go over what we did last time. So let's make a new sheet. And now from this new, okay, yeah, I think we're good. So from this new sheet, the first one that I want to make is, yeah, I'll name this one profit and sales dual axis. So I basically want to see on a quarterly basis per year what the relationship between profit and sales is. And to do that, I'm going to be using a dual axis chart. So dual axis is basically utilizing the left hand and the right hand axes of a chart. One side, I'm going to want to show profit, and the other side, I'm going to want to show sales. Okay. So how we do that is first we go to, okay, so we have sales and profit down here. Amir, can you see where year is?
You have to go to order date and then put that in yours. Is that what you're working with?
Got you. Yeah, order date.
So drag that over and then select either year or month or whatever you're interested in looking at.
So we're going to start off, I'm going to expand it to quarter. So I just basically clicked this plus sign over here and we expanded it to quarter. And I'm going to drag sales and profit. Give me a sec. There we go. Yeah. So what I actually wanted to do here was make it that side. There we go. That took a while. So what happened here was I basically dragged sales to the left-hand side and profit to the right-hand side with order date by quarter as the horizontal axis. We also have the measure names on the side. So what we see, you know, right off the bat, we can make some assumptions off of what we're seeing here, that in 2011, all throughout the year, you have steadily increasing sales, but the profit took a major dip from quarter one to quarter three, despite growing sales, which signifies that your cost of goods sold increased over that period of time. And for all the other quarters, for all the other years, it looks like they're pretty well correlated. And if you want to go into the analytics just a little bit, click on the analytics pane at the top left. You can go to trend line and drag that over to linear, and you'll have the trend lines over here. And they're also color coded. If you hover over any of them, you'll see the more descriptive statistics. So you'll have the linear regression line, the R squared, as well as the p-value, which shows how linear that really is. These aren't really super linear, so the p-values are going to be pretty high. This one's pretty low, so this one is very linear, and so is this one. This one's very low. So that's an intro of dual axis charts. These are very helpful if you want to compare two different measures on the same chart. So the next one that I'm going to be doing is just showing you a quick histogram. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to make a profit per person histogram. Profit per person. Okay. Actually, I'm going to make that sales.
Just a quick thing. I forgot to make bins in the previous calculation. So you can quickly go over how to make sales bins. If you need
Yeah.
that.
Actually, I can just make profit bins as well because we already have sales ones built. So to make a bin, so I would go over to profit, right click, create, and then go to bins. Okay. Can everyone see?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So I'll just keep the field name as profit bin, just so I know that it's in bins. And usually I go with suggest bin size because the computer does a better job at explaining or kind of categorizing the data than me, just so the histogram looks as efficient as possible. So over here, it says it's 224. I'm going to go with OK. And now you have the new profit bin in the dimensions pane. So it's a new dimension, basically. So what I'm going to do is I want to split it up by person. So these are all the people, and we essentially want to see how many in how much in sales they made. Oh, sorry, profit. I'm going to drop it to detail. And over here, you can see Shirley Daniels had the most amount of profit on average, pretty much. And then you can also do a calculated field. I think we're a little short on time, so I won't do that right now. But you can make a calculated field just to put profitability and unprofitability in it, and it'll show it in a legend. And you can essentially color code the people that are under the average and over the average. So this is a cool way to make histograms. This is an inverted one, but essentially has the same functionality. Another one we'll make is a circle view chart. So I'm going to make this one profit versus sales. And I essentially want to see the relationship between profit and sales. So this is going to be a measure versus measure chart. So each data point is going to be a dot. In this case, it'll be a circle, so it's going to be easier to see. Okay, so I'm going to drag sales to row and then profit to columns. It turns into one circle. And what I essentially want to do is make the categories by country. So I'm going to drag country to detail. And now all of a sudden, each country is going to have its own circle. So over here is the US. It has the most amount of sales and the second highest amount of profitability, right behind China. Mexico's here, France, Japan. So essentially, they're split up by country now, but we're still plotting sales versus profit. So that one's a pretty simple one. I'll go over another pretty simple one. And for this one, we're going to be making a pie chart. Okay. So I want to look at the sales by market. So for this one, just as a shortcut, I want to show everyone the functionality of the Show Me button. The Show Me button is in the top right corner here. So I'm going to select sales and market, one dimension and one measure in order to make the pie chart. Click Show Me. Go to the pie chart in the dropdown. Now this one, it's really small, so I'm going to make it entire view so it gets bigger. So from this, if you hover over, you'll see the market and the sales, but I want to see it as soon as I look at it. So I'll select the whole thing, right click, mark label, and always show. And we'll also put the market label for here. I think we can do both as well. Yeah, so that way you can see both the market and the number of sales in that market at first glance. This one I'll do by market. Now I'll move on to the ones that I want to include into the dashboard. Okay, so for this one, we're going to do profitability ratio by country. So I'm just going to drop categories into filter, just so all of the filters are the same for each one of our sheets. The profitability ratio, just as a quick recap, this is what it is. I just aggregated it so that it could be split up easily by country, which is what we're going to be doing. So first, I'm just going to drop the countries in row. All of them will be showing, and then I can drop profitability ratio right onto the viz, and all the numbers will show up here. I can even drop it into color so that you could easily visualize all of what's going on over here. Try to make it into a highlight table. Now it looks a little bit better. Now, I don't want to see all of this data at once because it's a lot of countries. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to filter by country just so I can see the top however many I want to see. So we're going to filter by country by dragging country into filters. Now this filter box is going to pop up. And remember how I said I want to see the top number of countries. I'm going to go to top, click the by field. Now you can do top 10 or top 20 or top 30, but what I want to do is make it dynamic. So with the slider, I can select how many of the top countries I want to see. So the drop down, I'm going to click create a new parameter. So for this one, I'm going to name it select top number. And this is just going to be a slider that we're going to use to select the top number of countries. I'm going to make the maximum 50, just so each increment is not super small, and minimum 1 for the top one. Okay. So that information's been saved by the field. We're going to make OK. And if you notice on the left-hand side, we have a new section now. It's called parameters. So these are all the parameters that we've made for this sheet. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to click Show Parameter, and now it shows here. So right now it's showing the top 10 countries by profitability ratio. Profit country, that's what I'm going to title it. So if I move this, it dynamically changes based on how many I want to see. And I think we can even change the format a little bit. I'm going to right-click on this, change the format so that the number turns into a percentage. And now we can see the profitability ratio by percentage. All right. I think I just have 2 more. This one's going to be pretty simple as well. This is going to be, I'm going to make sales per unit. This is the one, this is a calculated field that I made, and I'm going to visualize it using a tree map. So I pre-made this calculated field. I'm just going to show you what I did. So I aggregated sales, divided it by the aggregation of the quantity. So essentially, we're figuring out what average number of sales we got per quantity in each country as well. That's something that I'm going to show you later in the viz. So we're just going to name it sales per unit by country. Okay. So just to kind of fast forward, we're going to use the Show Me button again. It saves a bunch of time when you're using Tableau. So I'm going to select sales per unit, and I'm going to press Control, select country, go to Show Me. This is the tree map. First column, 4th row, click on it, and this is what it shows. Now, this is very busy. There's a lot of countries. I don't want to see all of it. I should also probably put the sales per unit in here. So I'm going to drop it on the text label, and now you see that as well. So Bangladesh leads all the countries, $166.3 per, yeah. Another thing that I want to do is change the tooltip. So by changing the tooltip, whenever you hover over one of these boxes, the content changes. Now, I don't want just country 1, country, sales, and then the number. It's kind of boring. So what I want to do is I want to make it a sentence. So how about, actually, yeah, I'm going to make it a sentence. So country 1, which is whatever dynamic country that we're hovering over, generates sales per unit. I'm actually going to put the $ before that. So that's the default per unit of sales. Okay, we made the tooltip. Now, whenever you hover over one, see it says Bangladesh generates $163.3 per unit of sales. Same thing for all of these. And like I was saying, there's a lot of countries here. So what I want to do is make a parameter to kind of select my top ones. So we're going to do the exact same thing we did last time, drag country to filters, top by field. Now for the parameter, we already have the one that we made, and it serves the same exact purpose, right? Select top number of countries. I'm going to do that. Okay, perfect. And now just to visualize, just to see the parameter so we could actually play around with it, I'm going to, yeah, just so you can see it, right click on parameters all the way at the bottom, show parameter, and we could slide it. You see now it looks a lot nicer. So if I want to see the top 10 countries, there's the top 10. The colors make it easier to see which countries aggregated more sales per unit. Bangladesh is still number 1, and you have all these countries. So it looks a lot nicer to visualize as well. Okay, now we're going to be moving on to something a little bit more involved. It's going to take a few minutes. So I want to do profit and sales KPIs. And what KPIs are key performance indicators. So essentially, I want to see how profit and sales, both of them, either both or one for profit and one for sales, mix and match between a wide variety of dimensions, whether it be countries or otherwise. So the first thing that I want to do is, okay, give me one sec. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a parameter, because what I want to do is create a bunch of radio buttons, or just a drop down, so that you can select which KPI you want to look at any given point in time. So the first thing I'm going to do is go all the way at the bottom left, right click, create parameter. So for this parameter, I'm going to name it profit sales KPIs. Okay. For allowable values, every other thing stays the same. For allowable values, I'm going to go from all to list. So from this one, this is what's going to allow us to do a drop down or a list. This is what we're going to put into our code, the value, and we're going to display it in the drop down in the display as column. So I'm just going to show 3 stuff here. And then for display as, I'm going to do the names of the measures that I want to show. So this is profitability ratio. Two is going to be sales per unit. Just the ones that we've already done already. And then the third one, just total profit, which is a measure that's already there. Everything else looks good. So now this has been created. Now, once we created the parameter, in order to actually put it into the visual, we need to create a calculated field to make it into a measure. So what I'm going to do is I could just go to analysis, create calculated field. Okay, name this profit and sales KPIs. So we're going to be using a case statement. And the case statement essentially is a when and then statement. So when I pick, let's say 1, because we had 1 as a value, then it's going to cut to a measure. So I'll just demonstrate it here. So case, so we're going to start with, and then I'm just going to drag and drop the parameter next to case, if it works. Yeah, there we go. Okay, when 1, then, and for 1, remember we picked profitability ratio. So I'm going to drag profitability ratio so it shows that. When 2, then second one was, I believe, sales per unit. Sales. Give me a sec. Okay, and then finally, when 3, then last one was profit. So instead of doing just profit, I'm going to do sum of profit, so it aggregates by whatever dimension we want to analyze it with. And then at the end, we just do end. Okay, so we've made it. And now we put the new calculated field we made here, profit and sales KPI, and we put it in, I'm going to put it in rows. And then we put, let's say, country in column, just so we could analyze it by country. All right. And I'm also going to press show parameter. So over here, by default, it's a dropdown. We can change it. We can make it single value, so it shows everything here. So if I go to the first one, the profitability ratios are showing for all the countries. We can also filter it like we did for the past 2 so that only the top values show up. Field, select top number, and then we show that parameter so that we can sort it, or not sort it, but filter it by that. Sorting it, we could also do by clicking on just that button over there right above the y-axis, and it sorts sales per unit as well, and total profit as well. Okay, so those were just a few KPIs. And I guess, because why not, I'll just drag sales to color just to make it look a little nicer. And you see that the US, although behind China in profit, is actually leading in sales. China is very high in sales compared to these other countries, but doesn't generate as many sales per unit. So you see these using colors and all the different types of marks that you have available. right, now real quick, I am going to make the dashboard. So this is going to be where we drag and drop all of our individual sheets into the dashboard. Hopefully it won't take too long. Before we do that, I want to kind of circle back to the sheets that we made in the last one, in the last Tableau workshop, because we're going to be using some of those in this dashboard. So we have this map graph, and then we have a few big number, there we go, yeah. And we have a few big number KPIs over here, all of which we're going to be using in our dashboard too. So first I'm going to drag the map graph. All the sheets are available here too, so it's really, really quick and easy to drag and drop. We just drag the map graph onto this. The map graphs take some time to load because they're the most visual. I'm just going to move it so everything's visible like that. Okay, cool. I'm also going to change the layout so that it looks bigger because I'm on my monitor. Okay. Okay. There we go. Yeah. So we have the map in the middle. I'm going to drag total profit and total sales, the big numbers, all the way at the top so that it's the first thing the viewer sees. It can look a little weird at first, but all you have to do is adjust, and it can get a lot better by just doing that. Okay. Now I want to drag profitability ratio by country to the left-hand side, but right underneath the title. Drag it so that everything looks visually pleasing. And notice how whenever we're adding these sheets into the dashboard, all of the filters are automatically appearing on the right-hand side. So you don't need to like re-add it or anything because they're already there in those sheets. You know, you could filter them straight from the dashboard, and you don't have to re-add them either because they're all automatically there. And we'll add a few more at the bottom as well. So all the way down at the bottom, I'll have all my KPIs. These are the KPIs. I'll just title these KPIs so I know. Okay. There we go. Once again, we're just going to make it a little smaller. I'm going to hide the title because we don't need it. Same for all of these, just to save some space, because we already know what these are. I'm just going to keep the big numbers because it looks nicer. And one more. I'll include the sales by market pie chart all the way here. We'll get rid of this title as well. Make this a little smaller because it doesn't need all that space. And just to correspond all of the legends with their corresponding charts, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make them into floating values. So I want these markets, like I don't want the legend next to the map. I actually want it next to this pie chart over here. So I'm going to click on this, make it floating, then I'm going to drag it down here. So that way it's clear where it belongs. Let me drag it there a little bit. So now you know that what colors correspond with which markets. I can do the same thing for the chart. Sorry, for the map. And I'll go floating and drag it over here. And it saves a lot of space too. Now there's a good amount of white space. It's not cluttered all over the place. I also want to make this center aligned. That doesn't look all over the place. Almost over time, but I swear this is all we have left. And now once you have the select top number thing, you'll notice that all the sheets that it applies to automatically readjusts. So both of the KPIs and the countries. Okay, I want to do one more thing, and that is show you the filters. So if you select this filter button, whenever you select one aspect of this dashboard, everything else changes at once. So I'm going to select it for all of them. There was a way to do it all at once, but I can't locate it right now. So we essentially have everything filtered. So whenever we filter one, a visualization, everything gets filtered. So let's zoom in, and I want to look at sales in the US and Mexico. So I'm going to outline the US and Mexico. And all of a sudden, we're only getting total profits and total sales from the US and Mexico. We know it's in the USCA and the Latin markets, and everything else is kind of not there because it's only these two countries. And once we click off, twice, I believe, everything comes back. So that's a cool way to make your charts as interactive as you possibly can. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we're at 8. I was going to show one more thing, but I think this is a good start to your Tableau learning experience. We learned how to make a dashboard, and we learned how to make a good amount of visualizations and put them together in the form of this dashboard as well. So I'm going to stop sharing. Does anyone have any questions about anything that we did? I know the chat